My name's Christina, and I am an alcoholic. And it's so good to be here. I want to thank you, Phil, and Becky, for the invitation to be with all of you. May I pull this down a little bit? And I want to thank the committee for having me, and thank you for the lovely little gifts and the treats in the room. I'm really happy to be with all of you. And if I haven't said it already, my name is Christina, and I am an alcoholic. And I guess I'm just going to get this thing started. There was an old-timer by the name of Sandy Beach who once said that Alcoholics Anonymous does not convince us there is a God, but what Alcoholics Anonymous is really good at is convincing us we need to find a God. And I didn't struggle with God when I got here. It's not my story. I always knew there was this love. I was a loved child of God, that there was this loving being. And somewhere along the lines of my alcoholism, I must have put God on a shelf, put him away. I guess because you can't serve two gods. And Alcoholics Anonymous has brought me back to my God. And I'm so very grateful. I'm from the Akron-Cleveland area, like Drew said, and we have a lot of history in Akron, if you're not familiar. Even in Cleveland, and in our early days, our co-founders, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, shortly after they met, they would have conversations in Dr. Bob's kitchen at his table at 855 Ardmore. And they'd have these conversations that would last into the late hours of the evening, early hours of the morning. And Dr. Bob would describe that kitchen table that they sat around as a modest piece of furniture. He called it modest. And we will gather around those tables, in people's homes from that day on to this, in church basements and coffee and ice cream shops. And what we find when we gather around such tables is identification, unity, and transformation. And I have absolutely transformed from this process. And I am going to try to put into words the transformation that has occurred in my life because of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I know I'm going to fall short because I don't think words do this thing justice. But words are all we have, and thank God for our stories. And I get to be a mother, a daughter, a sister, a wife today. I'm an auntie. I am a productive and useful member of my community. I pay my taxes. I have good credit, and I get along with my neighbors today. No longer am I a nuisance to society, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing. Thank you, AA. My sobriety date is June 19th, 1993. My home group is Pockets of Enthusiasm. We meet on Thursday nights at 7:30 in a little community called Brecksville. We're about halfway between Akron and Cleveland, about 20-25 minutes north and south of each. So if you're ever in the Akron-Cleveland area on a Thursday night, we'd absolutely love to have you. My sponsor's name is Pat Y, and she's been my sponsor for about 4.5 years now, I think. And I'm so grateful for her guidance, her direction, and her experience. She keeps me grounded in the steps and the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. My longtime sponsor was a woman named Beth Gordon, and she was local to my area. She was my second sponsor, and she sponsored me most of my sobriety. And she passed away right before COVID, 4.5 years ago, with 48 years of continuous sobriety. And she gave me everything that I have today concerning Alcoholics Anonymous and sobriety. And I love that lady. And I was raised by the old-timers in Alcoholics Anonymous, I want you to know. And if you're new here, find your old-timers. Go have a seat next to them. We're all inclusive here. We don't need an invite. Pull up a chair. I used to just sit and listen to them. I didn't want to say anything or talk to them. I just wanted to listen to them share their stories. And I think when our long-timers share their experience or their stories, they're really, to me, sharing a little bit about AA history. And if you fall in love with Alcoholics Anonymous like I have, you start to fall in love with our history. And Founders Day is in our area, in Akron, every year, early in June. And every year I try to volunteer in some kind of way. 8 to 10,000 people embark on Akron every June for this conference. It takes a lot of volunteers, so I always like to help out. And some years back, we were finishing up the Sunday morning meeting, and I was heading over to Dr. Bob's house. It was a great weekend. My husband volunteers at Dr. Bob's, and when I got over there, he was still very much caught up in his responsibilities in the business house next door at 855 Ardmore. So I walked into the living room at Dr. Bob's house. And in that living room, that afternoon, there was an old-timer talking to a couple of guys. But it just so happened that this old-timer was the longest-standing member of the Sobriety Countdown for that weekend. And you guys, this old-timer had 67 years of sobriety. And people were filing into the house to see it, because that's what happens at Founders Day. The house, there's a lot of people that come through. And people quickly realized what they'd walked into in that living room, because that old-timer, he was sharing, because this old-timer, he knew many of our early founding members. He knew Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, and he was regaling us with story after story of what it was like when he got to us, And people were filing in, and that old-timer ended up sitting on the couch in the living room. I sat at his feet, and the room filled up listening to this guy share his stories. And after a while, we all got to think, 67 years is a long time to stay sober. So we asked him how old he was, and he didn't really know how old he was. He said he was somewhere between 97 and 105 years old. And how do you not know how old you are? So we asked him that question, and he told us another story about how back in the day, people were pretty private. And he said his mother may have been a little vain, and she didn't want people to know how old she was, so she didn't tell him how old he was. And he didn't seem to mind. And when we asked him what Social Security goes by, he said 105. And why I like to share that story with you is this. That old-timer at 67 years sober, he's 105 years old. He's from Santa Barbara, California. He's sitting in Akron, Ohio at 855 Ardmore, talking to a bunch of alcoholics. He's found the secret sauce, right? He's still giving it away. And I had this friend, Frankie O from Toronto, Canada, a long-timer who I love dearly. He was a good friend. And I got word that he passed away, and my heart broke. And I called my grant sponsor at the time. She's a local lady from our area. Her name's Pat. And Pat, at the time that I called her, was 58 years sober. And I said, Pat, we're losing our old-timers. And she's lost all her old-timers at this point. And but these are my old-timers. And I said, Pat, we're losing our old-timers. And she said, Christina, it's time. It's time that we pass the baton on to the next generation. And guess what? Tag, you're it. And I was expressing to her my feelings of inadequacy on the task, right? And she just chuckled, as she always did. And she just said, don't worry, Christina, because all the instructions are already written out for you. And if you're new, what she's talking about is the instructions in our book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank God for good sponsorship, because I can complicate something so simple. So if you're sitting in this room and you're new, I wanna just offer you the warmest of welcomes to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're wondering if this thing is going to work for you, I want to tell you that Alcoholics Anonymous works, and it works well. And what was working 67 years ago for that old-timer when he first got to you was working for my grant sponsor, when she got to you 58 years ago, and was working for me when I got here 31 years ago. And I promise you, if you are willing to take these steps, take some actions, and take some direction, Alcoholics Anonymous will work for you too. And we got slogans here. We got first things first, keep it simple, keep coming back. But I want to tell you, if you're new to us, that just get in the middle of us. Just get in the middle of us and stay here. And stay until you hear your message of hope. And then keep coming back. And I always like to talk about identification from the podium, because I think identification is extremely important here. When I first got to you and I would sit among you and listen to somebody share, I would sit and listen for all the differences and none of the similarities. And I almost compared myself right out of the rooms. And the spirit of identification is the crux of this beautiful program and fellowship. We come from different walks of life. We come from different cultural, educational, financial backgrounds, and we all bring to the table in Alcoholics Anonymous diversity in experience. And so as I stand up here this morning and talk about my trouble may not look like your trouble. My trouble may not look like Drew's trouble, but trouble doesn't identify me as an alcoholic. Trouble is just a byproduct of drinking behavior. What makes me an alcoholic is I have this allergy of body, this obsession of mind, and I cannot safely predict what's going to happen when I put alcohol into my body. All bets are off, and one is never enough. So it took me a long time, to figure out when I'm sitting among you that I want to identify with the message, not so much the messenger, right? And I want to listen for 4 things. I want to listen for how we drank, how we lived, how we thought, and how we felt. Those 4 things are identification here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And really, identification is the beginning of hope for us. It's the hook, and we absolutely must identify to stay here. And, I used to question why some of us get this thing, this beautiful gift of sobriety. And by the way, if you're sitting in this room right now, you've already been given the gift. We all have. And we don't have to give it back. It's ours to keep, and I like to say it's like water. Water that flows down to earth's deepest and darkest crevices. God's grace and mercy flows down to our dark places, lifts us up to the sunlight of the Spirit, and we're given this beautiful gift. And I used to question why some of us get this gift and some of us don't. Why I stand before you in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and over the years, I've watched people I care about walk out those doors, never to return, to meet certain or uncertain death. I used to question why him and not me, and why me and not him. And over the years, I've come to realize that those questions and those answers are none of my business. They're really God's business. And that in my humanity, I am not capable of understanding the answers to those questions. And maybe I'm asking all the wrong questions, right? Today I know what my business is. Today I know I have been given, and I have accepted this beautiful gift, and I need to do the things that you taught me to do, even more so today than 31 years ago. And ultimately that means I need to be a giver and not a taker. My parents were great parents. They taught me morals and values. They gave me everything I needed and wanted. And somewhere around 4 years of age, my mom and my dad sat me and my younger sister down and told us they were getting a divorce, and I watched my dad walk out the door that day. And for the first time in my little life, I experienced this fear and uncertainty. And this fear would become the backdrop of delusional thinking and skewed perspective that would drive my thoughts, my actions, and my drinking. And in Bill's story, he talks about impending calamity, and I understand impending calamity. I was always afraid of what was around that next corner, that other shoe falling. If things were good, I knew that they were going to turn bad, and if things were bad, I knew that they were going to get worse. But woven beautifully within the instructions of our steps, it says, and I paraphrase, He enables us to match calamity with serenity, and today I know exactly where my solution lies. And shortly after my father left home that day, he was in a car accident because my dad's a big drinker. And he wrapped his car around a telephone pole and nearly died. And I remember my mom waking me and my younger sister up and telling us about it. And I don't remember if it was that night or the next morning. And I remember swearing that I would never be like that because I couldn't understand how someone I loved so much, someone whom I knew loved me, could go out and do something like that. And I swore I wouldn't be like that. And, I always felt different. I think at some point early when I started school, I must have made this conscious decision, that I wasn't good enough. And I always felt less than you, not pretty enough, not smart enough. I always felt like I was out in the cold looking in on everyone living their lives. I felt like I didn't get the memo. The memo that would tell you how to be, act, and talk with others. My tongue would get thick. My thoughts wouldn't come. My peers would seamlessly, maneuver childhood and adolescence with ease and comfort, while I, on the other hand, would always feel awkward and uncomfortable in my own skin. And I wasn't a finisher. You guys, I didn't finish anything I started. And I knew something was wrong with me. My first drink was a warm beer. My mom and my new stepdad went to bed that night. My sister and I, early in that afternoon, we stole some beers out of the refrigerator and tucked them under the couch. And when they went to bed, we had a friend over and we pulled out those beers, and I remember that first drink like it was yesterday. I remember everything about that first drink. I remember choking down that warm, disgusting beer. I didn't like the taste of it. I remember that it started to, after a few moments, it started to warm my insides. And then I remember this tingly feeling went down to my fingertips and toes. And then it went up to my head. And all of a sudden, I was enough. I was pretty enough. I could talk to you. My tongue was no longer thick. My thoughts were coming. And I could laugh at your jokes. I was no longer uptight. And I found magic that night. And it just got me started. And I started to get into trouble. And hindsight is 20/20, I think, in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I didn't see I was getting into the trouble I was getting into. I'm hanging out with all these kids. We're all doing the same things. Mom, get off my case, right? In my senior year, I was living with my dad because Mom and my stepdad, we weren't getting along, and I was living with my dad, and he's a big drinker, and he let me have the car on the weekends as long as I dropped him off at the bars. And the bars that he would frequent would be on a road called Brook Park. And in Cleveland, this road, there's a particular area that consists of dark, dank dives and gentlemen clubs. And I would drop my dad off in this area at one of those dives and go off and have the party. And the rule was I had to pick him up at closing, 2:30. And most of the time I was able to do that. There were a few oops, and those are stories for another day. But I remember picking up my dad in this one particular night at this joint he was drinking at. 2:30 in the morning, I walk in, and there's this gentleman sitting at the bar drinking the last drink of the night. And he probably wasn't a gentleman, so I retract that. And there was a couple on the dance floor drinking the last drink of the night. And over here in the corner of that bar, it was a dark corner, was my dad, and he was sitting at a round table. He had his back against the wall. He had his hands cupped around that glass and his eyes lost in that drink. And it took me a long time to figure out what it was about that moment that seared in my memory. And today I know that was the moment that I knew that alcohol had my dad. And once again, I swore I would never be like that. Little did I know I was already well on my way in my own alcoholism. And my father was an alumni of Ohio University. He was the first in our family to go to college and graduate, and he wanted his oldest daughter to follow in his footsteps. And so all the plans were made, but my senior year found me doing a lot of partying, and as a result, my class attendance and my grades suffered. And as a result of that, I didn't earn the necessary credits to walk the stage and make that rite of passage. And my thinking at the time was, so what? I'm not hurting anyone, right? But today I know that that's not true. Today I know that I robbed my parents of that privilege, that joy to watch their oldest daughter do so, because I'm selfish and self-centered. I was able to scrounge up those credits in summer school, and I walked into an empty high school unceremoniously, and I picked up my high school diploma, and off to school I went. I want you to know that Ohio University is a nationally ranked prep school for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had arrived, my parents were 5 hours away, and the bars are all in walking distance, right? And the party was on. And I had to declare a major, and I remember, I saw flyers that they were auditioning for the School of Dance, and I love dance. In high school, I was on the kick line, and I was in the dance company, but I had no formal training. I didn't have any technique experience. And the first audition, because I'm young and I'm thinking I'm going to go for it. And the first audition was a technique class. It was ballet. And I bombed that first audition. But they gave me another opportunity, and they put me in a choreography class, which I happened to excel at. And so they give you choreography, and you have to perform it. And I nailed it, and I'm in, right? And it was great. I loved it. And dance is not a fluffy degree, as one might think. It's not like insignificant. It requires pre-med, so it was anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and biologies. And I had the academic piece and the creative piece all wrapped up into one fine major. And I found my passion, and I thought I found my future. But my alcoholism was going to take me in a whole different direction, and really I just practiced my craft on the dance floor with a drink in my hand. OU sent me packing after about 2 years, and I moved up to Ohio State University, and I thought I was going to shower them with all my talents, but I only really ever talked about that from the bar stool. And I would start drinking on High Street where all the college kids drank. And but pretty soon I find myself moving to the outskirts of town, because that's just how I drink. And women, I didn't get along with women. I didn't have women friends. I didn't trust women. And it wouldn't be till I get to Alcoholics Anonymous that you would teach me about friendship here, you know. But I didn't trust women, men. I always knew what the deal was. There was this one gal that lived in my apartment complex. Her name was Cherokee, and still to this day I don't think that was her real name. And she ran this traveling dance group. You know, she had these girls, and they would frequent the dark dank dives and gentlemen clubs. And the girls would take off their clothes. And Cherokee wanted me to join her troupe of girls because, you know, she thought I studied dance. and you know, my thinking at the time was that this kind of dancing is beneath me, because I'm a real dancer, right? But truth be told, you know, I'll abandon all my morals and values, and I'll lower that bar and cross those lines, and I'll seek lower companions, and towards the end of my drinking, I'll end up right on Brook Park Road in all those dives and gentlemen clubs. I'm the queen of geographical cures. I could do a geographic without even going anywhere. And I do things like try to join Big Brothers and Big Sisters, you know, and I went for some interview for this agency, this organization, and that went really well because I can sell myself pretty well. And then they wanted to see my apartment, and my apartment was a mess, right? And my father used to say something to me. He would say, Christina, the company that we keep, the surroundings that we find ourselves in, they're all a direct reflection of what's up here, you know? And he was exactly right. My apartment was a mess, my life was a mess, and everything up here was a mess. And I went home and I cleaned about 75% of that apartment and threw all that crap and garbage in my bedroom. And in my delusional thinking, I thought, you know, they're not going to want to see that. And of course, thank God for the little girls, they did. And I did not become a big sister. I did things like try to join the church, the Catholic Diocese in Columbus. And Mother Superior knew exactly who she had in front of her, and she did not find me a good match for the church, I assure you. And then I successfully joined the Army. And I remember thinking when I was enlisting in the service that this was going to fix me. You know, I remember, and I didn't know it then. It's always in the looking back that we see, you know, some truths. And today I know I was fixing the insides by fixing my outsides. But as a direct result of my alcoholism and my drinking, I got discharged from the Army, and I was living on the streets of Cleveland. And this is how I was living. I was living with my collie Shepherd in the car in the middle of winter, and I'd warm up that car for a little bit because I didn't have a job or money, and I'd turn off the ignition, and I'd crawl in the back seat at night, and I'd curl up with that dog. And in the morning, I'd let that poor dog out of its prison, and I'd brush that fur off my body, and I'd sneak into restaurant bathrooms, and I'd try to take a bird bath in the sink, and I'd be horrified if you caught me. Just, you know, that shame and remorse. And I would move my car from street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood, because I didn't want you to know I was living in my car. And I found myself sometime later on a dead-end street with a brick building in front of me, and I had my dog in the back, and I'm drinking a six-pack, and I remember trying to figure out, make the calculations of how much distance I had from that building, you know, how fast I needed to drive my car into that wall and not survive. Of course, I end up finishing my drinks, and I head over to Brook Park Road, and I went to a bar. It was a hotel bar. I remember it was ladies' night. And I walked in, and there was a couple guys from high school. And these guys were nice guys. And I didn't hang out with nice guys. And one of them found out I was living in my car, and he offered for me to come and stay with him and his family, which consisted of his mother, his father, his sister, her husband, and children. And they welcomed me with open arms. You know, and they had this beautiful dynamic about them. These relationships they had were happy and open and kind and just so warm, and I was so attracted to that. And at the same time, I always wanted something different from my own family. I always placed expectations on them, you know, and wanted them to be something that they're not. And I would treat my family terrible, especially my mother, and I would say horrible things to her. And this isn't going to mean anything to you, but it means something to me, and it meant a lot to my mother when I ripped her heart out. saying things to her like, why can't you be more like Julie Kitchen's mom? And today I know that I have a beautiful family. I always have. You know, my family is wonderful. Today I know the problem is not my family or anything outside of me. The problem is Christina. And so I'm sitting at this young man's family's dining room table. We're having dinner one night, and my drinking becomes a topic of discussion. And here I find myself in an Alcoholics Anonymous household, because the father of this young man had 4 years sober. And he took me to my very first meeting. It was a Thursday night. I remember 2 things about that meeting. I remember walking in, and it was a little tiny basement, and I remember you could cut the room in half with that smoke that was in there, right? And I remember you guys were real happy. And on the back of that meeting, whatever it was, I don't remember anything that was said. I went to another meeting the next night. That was the West Clifton group on Friday night. It was 300 large. I came late. I sat in the back, and I was getting ready to leave early, and there's a young man walking towards me. He has a look on his face like he knows exactly who I am, and I have no clue who this guy is. And he catches me, and here he thought I was my sister who spent a year in Alcoholics Anonymous from 17 to 18 for her drinking, and he thought I was my sister. And he had these dark eyes, this dark hair. He's real handsome, and I took a hostage. And the long and short of that story is that we had this crazy, and those 2 meetings would be the last that I'd go to for a bit. And we had this crazy, violent relationship. And we had 2 beautiful children together. And in 1992, see, this young man's name was Rick, and he had 9 years sober. And he came home with a bottle of champagne on Sweetest Day evening. And he said, honey, I think I was just too young. I think I can drink safely again. And I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous or alcoholism, but I knew this. I knew he was in trouble. But I do what I do, and he popped open that bottle of champagne, and we drank it together. And my alcoholism continued off in this direction, and his alcoholism picked up right where it left off, and then some, because of the progression of this illness, and he went off in this direction, and we really didn't cross paths much. And my alcoholism took me to dark places, doing dark things with dark people. I burned bridges, I hurt my loved ones, and I emotionally and darn near physically abandoned my 2 children. And the type of mother that I was when I finally got to you was this. I would come to at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, hungover, very sick, and not in a good place to be a good mom to my 2 babies. And they would be locked in their cribs at 2 p.m. You know, they would have their diapers hanging off their little hips, saturated with urine and feces. They would be hungry for breakfast and their mother's love and attention, and I was incapable of all of the above. You know, and I would leave them with people who were no better suited than I was, just to get to the drink, because in my delusional thinking, I didn't want to drink in front of my kids because I didn't want to be like my dad. And I would leave them in these conditions that no children should be left in. And I remember when I would drop them off at these places that I would have this battle going on in my head. And I want you to know that I love my children more than anything in the world. I love them then, just as much as I love them today. But I would have this battle going on between my babies and the drink. And you know who won that battle. And you know who lost. And my children would lose every single time. And I left them with a couple. I remember, I like to share this from the podium because it reminds me of the type of mother that I am when I put alcohol into my body. I left them with a couple who were in bad shape initially, and my youngest was 5 months old. I know this because he just started crawling. And while their mother sat on a bar stool, my youngest crawled unattended behind their couch, and he got pinned. And he remained pinned for over 5 hours. And that is the type of mother that I am when I put alcohol into my body. All bets are off, even my children. So there's a series of events that bring me to my last drunk, and I'm face down on the west side of Cleveland in some joint, and I'm coming to a voice. It's Rick, it's my children's father. He has my babies in his arms. And I'll never forget the words that he spoke and the tone of his voice when he spoke them. I'll never forget the look on his face when he dropped my babies on my back and said, "Get up and be the mother you are supposed to be to these children." And he turned around and walked out. And at that moment, I knew that pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization our literature talks about. You know, and I scooped those boys up still drunk, and I drove them home. And I believe that day that something was cracked open in me, and I was given a little bit of that advanced grace. And I don't know how long it was from the time that I got home to the time that I had that surrender. And I said that God help me prayer. And I don't know how long it was from the time I said that prayer to the time that I picked up the phone. And I called one of two women who reached out to me at those two meetings I had gone to at first. And I called Janice. And I'll be forever grateful for that lady. She started taking me to meetings and you know, she started giving me directions. And I didn't get suggestions when I got here. I got directions. And she told me to stand at the door and welcome people coming into the meeting. That was my first commitment in Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is the girl who couldn't talk to people to tell me would get my thoughts. I didn't know what to say to people, but I had enough desperation that I did what you told me to do because everything that I was doing wasn't working. And I heard things here, right? I heard things like all I needed was a mustard seed size of willingness and I could have what you had. You know, maybe 1 millimeter, right? Just tiny. And I could have what you had, and I didn't know what you had. I just wanted a little relief. And you told me suit up and show up. Bring the body, the mind will follow. I did not have to think much, and that was okay with me at the time. And I stood at that door and welcomed people for a long, long time. And you told me come early and make the coffee and set up the meeting. You told me, you know, when the meeting is over, stay and clean up the coffee pots and the ashtrays. Wipe out the ashtrays and put them away and put the chairs and tables away. What does cleaning ashtrays have to do with me staying sober? But cleaning ashtrays and all that early activity has everything to do with me staying sober. Because that early activity bought me the time in Alcoholics Anonymous to put the steps into my life. And really that activity carries me even to this day. Because we train our feet in Alcoholics Anonymous, and if our feet are trained well, when the poo-poo hits the fan, newcomers, and it's life on life's terms here, the poo-poo will hit the fan. If our feet are trained well, we're going to know what to do. And so I started to get busy in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and taking commitments. And an old-timer pulled me aside at one point and said, Christina, if you want to learn something about sobriety here in Alcoholics Anonymous, you need to be teachable and childlike. And what he was telling me was, Christina, sit down and shut up. And so I got a home group and I got a sponsor and I started to get even more busy in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started hanging out with these young people and they started carting me to these meetings, and they invited me to a conference. It was the Cook Forest Conference in Cook Forest, PA. And I remember being in the back seat of this big car, a lot of people piled in it, we're drinking coffee, and I recall my mood to be lighter than it had been in a long time. And somebody popped a cassette into the player, and I know I'm dating myself here. And this woman started sharing. She was the previous speaker at the conference, and she started talking about those dark places that I had been and those dark things that I had done. And then she talked about feeling dirtier on the inside than she did on the outside. And no matter how many showers she took, how much soap she used, she couldn't get cleaner on the inside. And for the first time in my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, I heard somebody put to words how I felt. I identified, right? And then she talked about taking these steps. And as the result of taking these steps, she had a spiritual awakening. And as the result of that awakening, and many more to come, she said today she feels cleaner on the inside than she does on the outside. And I didn't know what you had when I got here, but I knew what you had when she said that, and I wanted it. It was get me busy. And I know I was in the process of my amends. And I'm complaining, I'm whining to an old-timer, and if you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't recommend that. I'm whining to this old-timer about these amends, and I knew I did, you know, I was complaining about something that happened to me, and I didn't want to make the amends. And she stopped me dead in my tracks, and she said, Christina, when normal people turn 18, they begin this process of growing up and taking responsibility. And when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, she said, we are well overdue. And I was pretty offended by that long-timer when she said that. But today, you know, because she was right, today I'm so grateful for those people who are not afraid to hurt my feelings here. Because what she was telling me was not that I'm responsible for what happened to me when I was a child. What she's telling me is I am responsible for everything that has happened to me in terms of how I think about it, how I feel about it, how I react to it, and my actions about it from day one to today, right? And what a huge freedom that is for me. And I would sit among you in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in my early days, and I'd feel this comfort. And I didn't know what it was at that point, but I do today. And I would experience this comfort sitting with you. And then pretty soon I would experience this comfort on my way to the meeting in anticipation of sitting among you. And then pretty soon it would extend after the meetings and then between meetings. And my life started to get better. I want to tell you a little bit about Rick. He was a Pied Piper in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is my children's father. And he had a following of young people. He was so enthusiastic about this thing. He started meetings on the west side of Cleveland. He'd give his shirt off his back for any one of us sitting here today. And he got very sick from the drink. He had 9 years when he picked up, and he ended up becoming a wet brain. And I had a front row seat to watch this thing rob him of everything he loved and valued, especially Alcoholics Anonymous and all of you. And he did make it back to the rooms, and I want to share that with you, because he'd walk through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, his pants would be around his ankles, and he'd have no idea. And the men here in Alcoholics Anonymous, you would go to his aid, you'd scoop him up, you'd get him situated, you'd bring him into the rooms, and you sat him down, and you made him feel welcome. You all brought him coffee and talked to him. I'll be forever grateful for that, because we don't shoot our wounded here. Unfortunately, most times he was not in his right mind. He might be talking to himself or looking straight through you as you were trying to have a conversation with him. He might be laughing when the speaker was up here talking. And he caught me at a lucid moment. He said, "Christina, I got to tell you, I got 1 foot in the door of Alcoholics Anonymous and 1 foot out, and I can't get back." And I had no idea how profound that statement was when he made it. I'm in school at the time because you told me I could be useful and productive, and it's a Thursday. It's actually Rick's birthday. We haven't seen him in a very long time. And I had classes till 4 p.m., and then he was going to come over and celebrate his birthday with his boys. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, I have a thought. You know how we are with our thoughts, and I have a thought that I'm going to cut class, because I told you I'm not a finisher. And I'm sitting there in class having that thought, and I have this heaviness on my heart for Rick, and I can't describe that heaviness. And no sooner did I have that thought to cut class and have that heaviness that I heard your voice, and you said, "No, Christina, when we make a commitment in or out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we see through to our commitments." And I stayed the course, because you guys have never steered me wrong. And at 4 o'clock I pick up my boys, and I head home, and I get dinner ready, and Rick is to show up, and he doesn't arrive. And this is not atypical of this time in his life. I make a couple phone calls. No news is good news. And so the next day, it's Friday, I'm going to go to class, and I have a full day. I pick up the boys and come home, and I'm getting them ready, because Friday night is my home group. And as a sober mother and a sober member, I'm going to take my children to somebody who can care for them properly. I'm going to take them to my mother's, and getting them ready. We're walking out the door, and my phone rings. And I turn around, it's before cell phones, so I walk over to the kitchen wall and I pick up the phone. And it's Rick's mom, and she's calling to tell me that Rick had passed away. And the coroner's report said that Rick had carved his initials in a 9mm bullet and shot himself in the head. And what I can tell you about that is this, that he didn't die in vain. Because I can learn from everyone here. There are no bad examples for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. I know exactly what he did and didn't do. I know he stopped going to his meetings. He stopped picking up his guys, taking them through the steps. He stopped calling his sponsor and taking those steps himself. He stopped doing all the things you taught him to do. And he believed that great lie that one day he could drink safely again. And I'll never forget the banner that hung behind the podium of my first home group. It said, "Watch well your beginnings. The results will manage themselves." And life went on for me and the boys, and we started to heal together, and life went on for me in Alcoholics Anonymous, and as a result, our lives got better. And about 3 years after Rick died, my first sponsor at the time, she called me up and she said, "Christina, I just want to tell you that I'm quitting Alcoholics Anonymous." And I thought, whoa, I did not know you could do that. And the reason why I tell you that is this, that I was floundering, and was self-directed in AA for almost a year, and I don't recommend that. The big book tells us we have a way out upon which we can absolutely agree, upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. You have my solution. My experience has been absolutely consistent. As I take these steps and practice these principles, all my answers come. You know, I don't have to know all the answers. I don't have to know what to do. All I need to do is show up and have some willingness. And God always meets me where I'm at, and He takes over. And the best part about that is I don't have to be invested in the outcome. It's none of my business. You know, I want to tell you about my children. They were raised in Alcoholics Anonymous. They would run around the rooms. They had a lot of behavioral problems. You know, and the women in Alcoholics Anonymous, you told me that this is normal for newcomer women. And as I stayed sober and got well, they would improve. And this happens for most women and men who bring children into to rooms of AA. But this didn't happen for me. My children would later be diagnosed with a serious illness. There's no cure, just treatment. And I was devastated. And I wallowed in some heavy self-pity, but you didn't allow me to do that too long because you taught me about footwork. So I started to get busy, and that meant that I was learning about their illnesses. It was layperson's information for starters, and then it graduated to medical journals, and I became quite the expert in the area of medicine concerning my children's illnesses. And you taught me about taking action, standing at the door, welcoming people coming into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. You told me that when I walk into a meeting and there's members already in attendance, that I'm to walk around and shake your hand and say hello. And all the other things that you taught me that I could advocate for my children, the girl who couldn't talk to people. And just like when Rick dropped those babies off on my back all those years ago and said, get up and be the mother that you are supposed to be, Alcoholics Anonymous taught me how to be that mother, and I'll be forever grateful. You know, I want to tell you about my husband. I met my husband here in the rooms, and one of the things that I was so attracted to when I met him was his enthusiasm for AA and this thing. And I think enthusiasm, and it's infectious and it's important. I believe I have a responsibility to be excited about this thing. Because AA, this process, it transforms our lives, it brings people together, and it brings people back together. And we have this life together. We share the journey. He's a member, and we do the deal together. I thought when I got here I was going to get the white picket fence and happily ever after, but that is not what Alcoholics Anonymous promises us. What we're given is a set of spiritual tools, sufficient for anything that I've had to deal with, life on life's terms here, right? But even more importantly, it's sufficient for those who have gone before me dealing with life on life's terms. And, you know, when my kids were very young, they were in special schools because of their adversities. And I got a job as a lunch lady in their special school, and I loved it. And I worked up there for about a year. It was part-time. It was great because I had a hard time dealing with their particular illness and leaving them in daycares and such. So I got this part-time job, and I loved it, and I'm working with these kids, and the staff approached me and said that they're opening up a new position, working in the classroom, and they wanted me to apply. And when I interviewed, I was offered that job. And I believe that when I was given that job, that they saw you and me, and I loved it, and I went back to school, and one day at a time, one class at a time, 1 year at a time. It took me 20 years raising my family and working full-time to get my bachelor's degree, and I walked across the stage at Cleveland State University with my mom and my dad and my husband in attendance. And about 10 years ago, I was honored and privileged to receive the Teacher Counselor of the Year Award. Thank you, AA. About 6 years ago, I felt God pulling me in a different direction, and career-wise, and so I traded my medical journals and my pens and paper for a hard hat and steel-toe boots. And today I work in the steel mills, and I'm a millwright. And if you don't know what a millwright is, it's like a mechanic that works on heavy machinery and big industry. I mean, the wrenches are this big, and I can't carry a 3-ton chain fall up a ladder, right? But I can burn and weld and fabricate, and I can work hard. I do what you taught me to do. work hard, and be teachable. And I'm one of 4 female millwrights in the whole entire valley of about 2,500 employees. And I work in the blast furnace. We make iron to make the steel, right? The beginning of the process of making steel. And I work with 35 guys, and you know, I just go in teachable and willing to work hard, and they're great. You know, they teach me and they show me, and I love it. And if you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, you may not want to be a millwright, but anything goes. Anything goes, you know, if you give this thing a try. I want to tell you about my God. I didn't struggle with God like I told you. But from that very first prayer that I said in the beginning of my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous, that God help me prayer, to all, you know, the coincidences that turned into God moments, having my eyes open to see God's hand at work in my life, all the surrenders, the big ones and the little ones, and then all the awakenings. Thank God they continue today. I was able to reestablish that relationship with my higher power, and I finally realized that I had undergone a profound alteration in my reaction to life. And my home group, so 85% back home in Akron, Cleveland, I don't know about here, but back home, 85% of our meetings are speaker meetings, and those speaker meetings, we have comments. You might call it crosstalk here, but we have comments, and people, after the speaker sits down, people will pop up like popcorn and thank the speaker for bringing in the message, right? And I had this old timer that would always stand up at my home group and thank the speaker for coming in, and he would always say the same thing, and I would just roll my eyes, right? He would always say, I came to, and I came to believe. And that has been my experience. I came to your meetings, you know, I see the light in your eyes, the smiles on your faces, and hear the chatter in the rooms. And you told me to take an action that I don't yet believe in. To surrender to someone else's prior experience, not to their will, to their prior experience. You told me my mind is the problem, and that ego tells me to think problems through, and program tells me to take actions instead. So I start taking these actions, right? And I come to, because I start to see that if I do what you do, I can have what you have. And so I start having these experiences because I start making these commitments. On the back of these actions I take, I have these experiences. And I don't know when that happened, and I started to recognize that. I don't know. A lot of times it's in the looking back that we see it. Sometimes it's in the moment. But I would start to have these experiences, and AA is experiential here. We experience this thing. And I would have these experiences, and they began to build this foundation around me, unbeknownst to me. And these experiences began to challenge my belief systems, you know, build a case against my old ideas. And I come to believe, right? Because, you know, like I said, AA is experiential. We experience this. And for those of us who have had a spiritual experience, there's no words necessary. If you've had a spiritual experience, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of us who have yet to have a spiritual experience, there's no words possible, because you have to experience it. And the only way I know to experience it is to take some actions. And, you know, at some point, I think, you know, I always felt like I was either less than or better than you, right? I have never been just with you, my spiritual malady. And so, you know, even to this day, you know, I have to work really hard and take these actions and take these steps to be with you. And I was talking to I was complaining, talking to my friend Martin, and we're having this conversation, and I know I was being judgy. And I'm judging this person and talking to Martin, and I said, Martin, the highest we ever get in Alcoholics Anonymous is humble servant. And he said, no, Christina. He said, the highest we ever get is member. And there it goes, right-sized again. And so I get right-sized, and it brings me back to you, right? And when I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm also a member of, you know, of humanity. And what a beautiful thing that is. Frankie O, that dear beloved old-timer from Toronto, Canada. My dear friend Frankie, he would always, when he'd take the podium, he'd talk about waking up in Alcoholics Anonymous, being awake in life and being present in the moment. And I can just miss it all, being caught up in the worries of yesterday or the fears of tomorrow, or perhaps I'm consumed with all the things on my list that I need to get done that I just miss the moment here and now. I don't want to miss today anything. I don't want to miss the newcomer coming into the doors. I don't want to miss my sons when they experience, personal joy and success, and I don't want to miss my beautiful niece when she's telling me her wonderful stories, like the time the little girl in class burped up a cupcake. I don't want to miss anything today. My dear beloved sponsor, Beth Gordon, my longtime sponsor, she would talk about Alcoholics Anonymous being the greatest love story ever written and ever told. And isn't it true? From our earliest beginnings at bedside to our humble neighborhood meetings and home groups, it's gatherings such as this and Founders Day. It's one alcoholic sharing with another alcoholic that we finally come home. And so, I want to. No, you're good. If people can you hear me? I'm wrapping up. I'd like to close with a story about a little boy who walks into Sunday church with his mom for the very first time. And he looks up at the beautiful stained glass windows and he says, "Mommy, who are those glass people?" And his mother looks down at him and says, "Why, those are the saints." And the little boy goes to school the next day. He's still in awe from the day before. And his teacher asked him what he did over the weekend. He said, "I saw the saints." And she's like, "Well, who are the saints?" And the little boy, he says, "The saints, they're the ones that let the light in." So I want to thank all of you for always being present in the moment for this alcoholic. I want to thank Alcoholics Anonymous for letting the light in. Thank you for my life.
Thank you, Christina, for talking. We will close with the Lord's Prayer, and she will be up here after we get done praying.